Thank you so much for joining session 2 of our Elevate Equity event. We've been discussing the importance of removing barriers to attract diverse talent, but once they're through the door, the journey must continue. Diverse representation slows at manager and C-suite level. Employers are losing talent due to inequitable career pathways, and we're going to be looking in this panel at how to really adequately address that. Experiences at work determine feelings of belonging. If employees feel valued and included, they are far more likely to become engaged and also remain in your company. When employers are engaged in workplace activities, they are typically more motivated and therefore able to do their best work. It really is as simple as that. You know, often we talk about the need for diversity, but the focus really does have to be on inclusion and belonging and what happens when people actually enter your workplace. And what you've done beforehand, as we heard in the session earlier, to prepare your workplace to actually be a place that is truly inclusive of diverse talent. We're going to really be looking at how to nurture and develop talent to become the best that they can be, and as we just said, deliver their best work for you. If you've just joined, then welcome. Those of you that are online, and anybody that's new that's joined us in our live audience too, welcome. Obviously, the old people, you're welcome as well. I'm June Sarpong, and I will be chairing all of the sessions today. And I'm super excited to introduce you to our second panelists. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves first before we kick off the discussion. So next to me, we have Wendy. Wendy, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, thank you, June. My name's Wendy Ramshaw. I'm thrilled and privileged to be here today and participating in this conversation. I've been an ambassador for creating equitable and inclusive workplaces now for about 10 years. In both banking and in law, which are notoriously very male-dominated, high-performance and stressful cultures.
Not known for their diversity.
No, exactly. So I think as a woman in those male-dominated worlds, I've sort of really pioneered and hopefully championed more equitable places for gender. But latterly, I've been the head of DE&I and emerging talent at a global law firm, and I think that role has really enabled me to learn and grow as well, and to look at that sort of wider spectrum of diversity. And also it sort of taught me skills of patience, perseverance and resilience, I think, as well. It's not an easy role to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Wendy. Lucy.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Hunt. I am National Programme Manager for Apprenticeships at NHS England. So we are essentially the kind of learning and development arm of the NHS. So very big job in very challenging times. And I'm really, really passionate about social mobility and widening participation and making sure that our workforce is representative of the communities that we serve.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lucy. Charlotte?
Hi everyone, yeah, such an honour to be here today. So I'm Charlotte Mosley, I'm a Senior People Scientist at Culture Amp. Everyone's pretty always intrigued by my job title and what that means, but essentially my background's in occupational psychology, and really at Culture Amp our role is to make sure that everything we're doing is really kind of grounded in that science and in that research.
Yes.
So it's been amazing actually to hear the panel earlier talk about the importance of data, because kind of everything that we do at Culture Amp is driven by data, and really my role is to help organisations from everything from employee engagement, performance, all the way through to DEI. And I've been at Culture Amp for around 4 years.
Brilliant, congratulations. And then last but by no means least, Balvinder.
Hi June.
Hiya.
Hi everyone. So I'm Balvinder Joel, I'm Director of Sector Development. I work for a unit, an umbrella unit at the Open University, which works right across all the schools and faculties. Particularly look after sectors like health and social care, which includes the NHS, which we've done a tremendous amount of work with, and social care. The public sector, so we're supporting things as diverse as policing through to the MOD, and of course our private sector, a tremendous amount of work that the university does to support employers engage in learning and develop their staff.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we want to start the discussion by asking our audience what your organisation has in place for existing staff to grow and develop. So what does your organisation have in place for existing staff to grow and develop? You can respond by scanning your Slido for those of you that are joining us in the studio right now. And of course, for those of you that are online, you can see the link on the screen. So while we wait for our audience answers to come in, Charlotte, I'm going to come to you first. I'm loving that title, Senior People Scientist. Fabulous. I mean, that should be your opening line anywhere you go. Yeah. Not even your name. I'm a Senior People Scientist. So you mentioned the work that Culture Amp is doing. They recently produced a report that looked at issues and that organisations are facing in terms of developing diverse staff and retention. What did the report find?
Yeah, so we partnered earlier in the year with another research company called Censuswide to really kind of understand the state of DEI across Europe. So the survey went out to over 5,000 employees as well as 1,250 HR decision makers. From that HR perspective, we were really interested to understand what are some of the barriers that HR are facing in driving some of those DEI initiatives forward, what are the perceived experiences of their marginalised employees, and then from the employee perspective, we really wanted to kind of uncover how do employees feel about their own organisation's approach to DEI, what are their own experiences, and really how is that impacting in terms of their feelings towards the organisation. So one of the really interesting findings that came out of the research was that out of the kind of diversity, equity and inclusion pillars, HR told us that it was really equity where they were focusing and really kind of doubling down on their efforts over the next 12 months. In fact, whilst we're seeing that, you know, there's that big effort on hiring still, around 28% of HR said they're really thinking at deeper ways that they can then develop talent once it comes into the organisation, so specifically women, those from ethnic minorities and those with disabilities. And it really feels that there is this like shift happening where I think previously organisations were really focused on just driving up diversity through hiring. But it feels now that there's this real shift and actually organisations are starting to recognise that it's not just enough to bring that diverse talent in, you really need to be creating those kind of equitable experiences and practices once they are in, and you're creating that environment where they can really kind of thrive and grow. So other interesting bits that came out of that research is that HR told us that they only believe that 6 out of 10 employees have those equal opportunities to actually advance careers within the organisation. And it was really similar when we look at the employees. So again, only 6 out of 10 employees are saying that they feel that they've got those equal opportunities to advance. So definitely room for improvement there. And that's actually pretty consistent with findings that we've done ourselves internally at Culture Amp. So when we look across some of our data from customers who have run inclusion surveys, again, we see these really vast differences in that perception of how learning and development is actually applied across the organisation. We know, for example, non-white employees often report much lower kind of positivity around those career advance opportunities. We know that women often report being a lot less favourable when it comes to the fairness of how their performance is measured, as well as that kind of equal opportunities aspect. So it really feels that organisations still have quite a long way to go when it comes to really kind of nurturing and developing that talent once it's there within the organisation.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that with us, Charlotte. So it looks like our results are in. Can we see if we've got our results in yet? Okay, I can't see them on my iPad. We'll come back. Can you feed them into my iPad, tech team, please? So I'm going to move on and then I'll come back to the results. Wendy, I would love to come to you. It'd be great if you could bring you in at this moment. Now, you've had over a 20-year career. Obviously, you started when you were in kindergarten, darling. And you've been in the financial services and legal sector, which you shared with us. Obviously, we know that there is a real perceived lack of diversity in those sectors. What have you seen works when it comes to retention and development of diverse talent?
I think there's sort of 3 key areas, really, and that's certainly underpinned my approach as well in the role that I've had. I think the first one, and it's a word that's been mentioned a lot today already, is psychological safety. But I think you can do that through the employee networks that you might have. I think you do it as well through kind of effective feedback mechanisms and enabling people to have those kind of honest conversations. Yeah. I mean, I've seen in the employee resource groups some amazing ideas coming from grassroots, and I think that's how you really connect and engage people with the agenda as well. I mean, our gender networks have been absolutely instrumental in shaping our maternity policies, paternity policies, carers policies, you know, and we touched on that in the earlier session about bringing people in to really advise and communicate around those policies. I think the second strand of it is the infrastructure. hiring diverse talent is wonderful. It's then that next stage. So really critically assessing what are the infrastructures in place, what are the systems, the processes, the procedures that then enable that talent to then progress through your organisation. And I think talent matrices have got a really important role to play in that as well, into kind of looking at that spread of diversity and seeing where people are, whether they're in that top right-hand corner or bottom left-hand corner, and asking those very important questions as to why are they there? What are the opportunities that are being opened up to those people perhaps in the right-hand box that are not accessible to everybody? And also challenging the assessments of performance as well. So in the legal industry, you have one very singular method of performance, which is an hourly culture. It's how much you bill in terms of hourly billing, and I think that can sometimes restrict people from really playing to other strengths as well that enable them to perform in different ways. So again, sort of critically assessing that is really important. And then I think the third one is culture. Again, we've touched on that today. And as a DEI professional, you often feel a lot of responsibility that it's down to you to really shape and change a whole organisational culture. But actually, it's about engaging hearts and minds, having those conversations in sometimes small groups as well to drive awareness of some of the issues, to build in male allyship, I think has been a really important one in those very kind of traditional male-dominated environments. So connecting people to those issues at a human level, I think is vitally important.
Fantastic, brilliant. Well, we have some of our answers in, and then I'll come to you next, Bhavinder, after. So one person said, nothing as yet. So we've got some really good answers to the question, which was, what does your organisation have in place for existing staff to develop and grow? Appraisal system, online learning, apprenticeships, leadership courses specifically for women, internal development programmes, access to learning via civil service learning, our own academy running specific courses relating to our work, paid time off to support gaining qualifications, as well as mentoring. I want to know what company this is. Let's get their information. Coaching and mentoring, an inclusive career development program focused at disabled people and people from minoritized ethnicities. Initially joined up with our local integrated care system. Lots more there, so seems that there's quite a bit happening in the companies that you all work for. So I'm going to come to you next, if I may, Bhavinder, which is diverse representation matters, not only within an organisation, but also to reflect the communities and customers that a company serves. How does this look for you and the employers that you work with?
So if we just rest on that phrase, the customers, the communities you serve.
Yes.
And so if I draw down onto some of the work that we're doing around social work, so social workers, by their nature, work in really challenging environments. And what we're finding now is local authorities are approaching us to say, how can we unlock this talent and support people to move to social work qualifications, people who are representative of the community they serve.
Yeah.
So not only do they go into homes and do a really challenging piece of work, but the person who they're serving, who they're supporting, can look at the individual and go, I think I recognise you, I can relate to you, I want to open up to you, I want to trust you. It's so important. And if you contrast that work to some of the work we're doing with the NHS right across the country, the NHS Trust approach us and go, well, that's great. We have nursing schools. So if I talk about Oxford University Hospital Trust, a partnership we have Oxford Brookes. We have a fantastic partnership with them. They provide us and churn out nurses. But these nurses are coming from a distance, landing in Oxford, getting qualified, and majority of them, some of them, move on back to the home communities. What we're saying is we have a huge amount of talent locked into our local community. How can we support them to a career in nursing?
Yeah.
And so we have a partnership with Oxford University Hospitals Trust, which is just to take those healthcare support workers, demonstrate to them, I think Jagdeep talked about earlier on about apprenticeships, demonstrate to them there's an apprenticeship, there's a route to a professional qualification, which not only means you get a qualification, but you're wedded and embedded into the community you're serving.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're reflective of the person that you're going to try and support.
Brilliant.
I think that's just so important.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bhavinder. So Lucy, I'm going to come to you next. Now, we know that representation is hugely important to the NHS. but there's also a lot of pressure too, particularly for your organisation, when it comes to recruitment and retention. What does that really mean for you, and how are you ensuring that you're first of all, attracting diverse talent, and then, of course, retaining them?
So yeah, as I said, you know, it is really, really important that our workforce represents the communities that we serve. We know that there is a real issue in terms of representation in senior leadership in the NHS. People aspire to what they see, so if you don't see it, you're not going to aspire to those roles. We have various kind of widening participation programmes in place to make sure that we can support people from underserved communities. As he mentioned, one of the good examples is in terms of our nursing apprentices. A lot of them were existing staff who could never have afforded to give up work and go back to university and do the traditional route. Now, via the degree apprenticeship, they're getting the opportunity to fulfil their dreams and, more importantly, helping us with our critical workforce needs. So that's just one example. But yeah, I think recruitment is really, really important, but that retention piece is also important for us. And now where we can offer career pathways from level 2 up to level 7 via the apprenticeship route, we are finding that retention is increasing.
Brilliant, fantastic, thank you. So we're now going to move to our next section, which is how can learning and development help? I'm going to come to you first, Charlotte. Now, learning development is a continuous process, and a single EDI training course isn't really going to move the dial, if we're honest, in terms of creating an equitable and inclusive culture. What do organisations need to do, and what do they need to consider to cultivate true equitable workforce pathways?
Yeah, well, I think first I completely agree. Like, one training course isn't going to fix anything.
No.
I know in the previous panel, you mentioned unconscious bias training, and I think what we know is something like that is rarely actually going to be effective or have that desired impact. I think there's a lot of research out there now that shows in many cases it can almost have that adverse impact by really kind of bringing those biases to the fore. So I think one way that, you know, at Culture Amp we talk about really cultivating that more equitable experience, especially when it comes to development, is having those really well, clear and defined processes, something kind of you mentioned just a moment ago. But actually, according to our research at Culture Amp, only 40% of companies actually have really clear, defined processes when it comes to development. And we know that that's problematic because when development, advancement decisions are being made, you know, subjectively, when they're not being made in line with consistent performance metrics, we know that that then leads to bias, and it can actually really favour majority groups who are then granted better opportunities, and so the cycle kind of begins. So it's really important to get that structure there. And actually, when organisations do implement that more kind of clear process for development, it not only helps minimise, you know, inequity more generally, but it also helps employees really understand that clear pathway of how they can develop and what's needed to get there. So, you know, what might that look like in practice, or what are some things that organisations can really do? Well, it sounds like such a small thing, but even if we think about, you know, feedback, which we know is so crucial for a person's development, what we know is, though, that when individuals give feedback to females, it tends to be focused more on their personality, more on their attitudes, whereas when we see feedback for men, it usually tends to focus more around their behaviours and their kind of accomplishments, and it's inherently a lot more actionable. So straight away, this is creating those barriers. It's exacerbating the gender pay gap. It's kind of creating those different opportunities that are then able to exist for men and women, even when it comes to development. So one really small thing that organisations can do is actually put more structure around how people are giving each other feedback. So something that we use at Culture Amp is the SBI model, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So anchoring feedback around a situation, behaviour, the impact. And as I said, it can be such a small change, but it really then just puts everyone on that level playing field when it comes to getting feedback, and how that then can really be used for kind of development going forward. As well as having, you know, those more structured processes in place for development, it's also important to consider that from that performance side as well. So again, really making sure you're evaluating your performance processes for fairness, for equity, to make sure that it isn't, you know, biasing towards your kind of majority groups, I think is really important. And something, again, that we are starting to see more organisations do now is conducting almost like equity analyses on their performance processes. But again, we know that it's the minority of organisations that are doing this. So again, from our research, only around 43% of organisations actually say that they regularly conduct an equity kind of analysis or an audit. So again, I think certainly room for improvement in this area, but really I think organisations can focus on really getting those clear and well documented and kind of communicated processes in place when it comes to development and performance, so that we're not kind of putting those underrepresented groups at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it's so important what you said there, particularly around feedback. We know that the data also shows that when it comes to appraisals, those from the majority group have difficulty giving positive or negative feedback to those from the minority group. So it's really important to get this right, because if you're from a diverse background, it's the thing that makes or breaks your progress at the end of the day. So yeah, fantastic. Okay, so thank you for that, Charlotte. I'm going to come to you next, Wendy. And so why should equity and inclusion be at the heart of any decision when devising learning and interventions and long-term development programs?
I'm going to say everything that Charlotte just said. So, you know, none of this is easy.
Yeah.
I think we've established that, you know, having equity and inclusion at the heart of everything we do within an organisation is absolutely critical. And learning and development feels to me a very pivotal part of organisational success. I think it's not often reflected in the budget or in the time that's allowed for people to engage with learning and development. So, you know, there are other side issues. But I think for me, I'm a big supporter of Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and slow. And I think that what we're talking about here is how we think slow. Because a lot of this stuff is challenging. I mean, everything that Charlotte said is absolutely spot on. And I think this is the work that we're trying to do. But actually educating and helping someone to do appraisals in a different way, to have that growth mindset, to think about things in a different context, it's not easy, because when you're busy, when you're up against it, you're just going to revert to old habits that gets the job done the fastest way possible. So I see it sort of being very purpose-led in the sense of how are we educating people around the issues, but also how are we educating people around the skills that are required to actually undertake this new way of thinking and to be more inclusive in the approach. So I think for me, learning and development teams have an absolute integral part in thinking about how they're building inclusion, diversity and equity into the materials, the method of delivery. I mean, a great example, I was talking to a friend the other day who works in a school, and she absolutely has the capability and potential to be in a senior leadership role, but the head teacher said to her that in order to do that, she had to do a training program that took place at a time of day that just didn't work for her from a caregiving perspective. And so she is now, you know, out of consideration for that senior role. And, you know, there are so many examples like that where we don't think about when we're scheduling things to make it accessible to people. We don't think about how we are delivering a presentation to make it accessible for people who are neurodivergent. We don't think about some of those kind of wider contexts of travel or, you know, who might be able to attend that in person. I mean, the hybrid world has really, I mean, today is an excellent example. We've got people in the room, but we've also got lots of people online that are able to access this session. So connecting people to knowledge in a way that works for them, so that real equity piece is absolutely crucial. And I think that's where learning and development is really focusing now, is that individual need and how we connect to individuals to enable them to thrive and grow.
Fantastic, thank you. So Lucy, now you're very passionate about apprenticeships and consider them not only as a great tool to recruit new talent to the NHS, but also as a way of upskilling existing talent. What benefits have you seen, and how have you been able to evolve this approach through the NHS?
So we have been reaping the benefits since the introduction of the apprenticeship levy in 2017. Initially, it just meant that for once we had a ring-fenced pot of money to be spent on developing staff. So as you said, you know, two-pronged approach. We attract new recruits, but upskilling the existing workforce is really, really important. We've mentioned that obviously we know that it helps improve with retention, but I mean, I just think just examples, you know, the medical doctor apprenticeship that we've just launched is hugely exciting. And that's going to have the exact same academic requirements as the traditional route, but for all those young people that couldn't afford to effectively be unpaid for 7 years while they trained to be a doctor, they're now going to be able to have that opportunity. So things like that are just hugely changing kind of, hopefully, the diversity of our workforce. It's really, really exciting. And I just think, you know, we need to recognise that it is challenging in the NHS. So by offering this continuous professional development, you know, we are making the staff feel like they are valued and that they can progress. So again, that's a really good positive for us.
Fantastic. And how have you seen things change over the time you've been there?
I think diversity is growing. I mean, when I first started in this sector, I was always the token brown woman rolled out on the panels. And yeah, it was often very much snowy white peaks. So it's good to see that now that there's a lot more women on panels, there's a lot more diversity. And I just think, yeah, in terms of attracting people into the NHS, you know, we recognise that we have people from all over the world, and it's been able to accommodate them, recognise their existing qualifications. Someone mentioned earlier on about the taxi driver. My Uber driver in London the other day was a doctor from India, and he wanted advice on how we could get his qualifications recognised.
Did he give you his CV?
But you know, there is so much talent out there that needs to be supported, so whether that's recognising international equivalencies or supporting them to upskill. You know, there's lots of work that needs to be done.
For sure. Wow, what an but how great to even have that conversation, for that to come up.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so do we have any more questions on the iPad from our audience from before? There were a few that I didn't get to. Can we get that up for me on the thing? I think I might have pressed something. Tech team, I need a little help. I'll come back to that. So moving on to part 3. And in this section, we are going to be looking at using learning in your benefits package. I think this is really important when you add this as a key driver into why somebody would stay in your company or even join your company in the first place. So Balvinder, if I may come to you first, why should L&D be considered as part of an employee value proposition?
Well, to me, I think it falls into three categories. So you've got attraction, retention, and progression. And so what is it you're trying to do? And what is your value proposition to the individual? And so a few times today, Lucy's kindly referenced the taxi driver, and Gamal earlier on talked about the taxi driver. So if we just look at the work that we do with Uber, for instance, so Uber sponsor their taxi drivers to develop qualifications. So we have 1,500 taxi drivers working, fully sponsored by Uber, towards a qualification at the OU. Both the individual driver and support to their families. And why is it Uber have done that? Well, clearly they're looking at an attraction piece. Well, why not become an Uber driver? But more so retention. Why not stay with Uber whilst you learn on the job primarily? And then the most important piece to me is that progression piece. Not just learning for the sake of it, but learning to enhance your career and then move on and elevate yourself into a new role. So absolutely, organisations should really take a close look. What is it they're trying to do in that value proposition? Because it resonates right across those three sectors. Attraction is one piece. I'll refer, everyone knows me, I'll reference my two daughters are of that age, that generation, where that's totally alien to me. They're now 19 and 23. They look at organisations and jobs and dismiss them so quickly. I mean, they're a fantastic talent pool, but it's this snap judgment that they're making. And it always goes back to, that's great, because I've got the talent, Dad, but what's in it for me? And that's what they're really looking for as they're moving forward for their careers.
But it's amazing. I mean, there's so many people who wouldn't even know about this partnership with Uber and the opportunities that the talent who have even more to offer than what they're currently doing have access to. And what are some of the results that you've been able to see from that program?
So we
or similar programs?
Well, it's not just Uber. Amazon are doing a similar kind of thing. It's where it's not just encouraging it for the sake of benefiting Uber, it's to benefit the individual and to move on to other careers.
Yeah.
So we've got 1,500 people who have been sponsored. They only just recently started, but the first 14 will graduate next week and potentially move into careers within the NHS, into careers that they really feel fulfilled to, and perhaps were, as the taxi driver from India will go, validated. Actually, I'm now going to use all the skills and all the learning I had to serve the community that I'm working in.
Amazing, brilliant. Thank you so much. So I'm going to come to you next, if I can, Lucy. Can you tell us about why learning is an intrinsic part of the NHS's offer to employees?
I think lifelong learning is just really important. So whatever stage you are at in your career, to be able to access opportunities. I think whether you're a new recruit or you're an established member of staff, or you've taken a career break to raise your children and you need to upskill.
Yep.
I think you just need to recognise whatever stage of life or career you are at, that you can access the opportunities. You know, as I said, we've got this huge pot of levy now that we can use if people want to retrain, move into other departments, and we can facilitate that. And I just think it's just, you know, we know that our employees will tend to be local, a lot of them will have families to support, so if we can show that they can actually progress in their careers, you know, earn more money and are feeling developed and valued, then that's just going to help us further in terms of our retention problems.
Wow. And then isn't there a part of it where you waiver some of these fees for staff, isn't that right?
Yes, so in terms of the apprenticeships, the education programmes are fully funded, so that could be degrees, that could be masters, but also, you know, to recognise that some roles you only need a level 2, level 3 qualification, so it's not just all about the higher qualifications. So yeah, if you do an apprenticeship in the NHS or any sector, then your education is covered for you. So in terms of you know, moving forward, my 16-year-old, I want to say to her, do an apprenticeship. I don't want to have to pay student finance and top up all of her loans. Yeah. And actually now she's looking at that in terms of, I'll come out with £60,000 of debt and not a job. You know, I think it's a no-brainer in terms of apprenticeships.
And also now there are so many of these types of opportunities, so it's not like you're limited to just one sector. So many different organisations are doing it.
Yeah,
so yeah.
Definitely.
Amazing. Balvinder, if I could come back to you just quickly, and then I'll move on to you, Charlotte. Balvinder, does the Open University offer something similar to what
absolutely, yeah. We fully support
describing?
apprenticeships. We have a staff fee waiver, so anyone who works with OU can be funded towards a qualification. It's tremendously successful. Earlier on, Jumar's referenced the fact that once someone joins the OU, they tend not to leave. And one of the reasons behind that is all the free resources that we offer. But it's not just qualifications. So if I give you an example of just in my team, in the colleagues I have, someone referenced earlier on dyslexia. I have a colleague who's working towards a degree and will be graduating later on in 2 weeks' time, going to the ceremony. We've supported that individual all the way through. I have an individual who's gone on to do their master's and is now doing their PhD. And again, whilst they're at work and retaining. And those are just the big qualifications. Someone like myself there's this huge wealth of free learning resource, short courses, my credentials. These the types of courses where I just think, I'll just dip in and have a look and learn something new, from photography to becoming a digital expert, whatever that might be. Or something over here like counselling. I've done counselling courses. Just type of thing just keeps me interested and keeps me, wow, I'm adding value, I'm learning, and I'm staying with the OU. So, yeah, we do a tremendous amount.
Amazing. Did you want to add something, Charlotte? Did I see you put your hand up? No, you're okay. Okay, so I'll come to you, Wendy. So have you seen learning form a part of an employee value proposition in your sector too?
Less so. I think because we are in a professional services industry, you know, continual professional development
is expected anyway.
Is expected, yeah. I think what's interesting though is obviously professional services firms are made up of only 50% sort of fee earning and 50% people like myself who are there to support fee earners. And I think the criticism is often levied that, you know, there is insufficient support for those parts of an organisation.
Support.
So, absolutely, yeah. So I think it's, I mean, I love the fact that you've got these sponsored programmes available, and I was sat there thinking, oh, I'd like some of that.
Yeah.
But having said that, it is absolutely supported. So I myself have benefited from coaching qualifications. I've done various sort of personality profiling type assessments as well. So I think that, you know, if you ask for it, then you are genuinely very supported. I think the challenge is asking for it and knowing what's available and being brave enough to advocate for yourself, to say, yes, this is something that would really benefit me in my career. And I think the other side of it as well is to the point that Balvinder made, it's very important to align that opportunity with a career opportunity as well. And
that there is actually going to be something at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. So making it feel like it's very sort of purpose-driven, I think, is probably quite important.
Yeah, I agree completely. Charlotte, I'm going to come to you. From a culture amp perspective, what types of benefits do you see actually matters to diverse workforce?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the obvious ones that we're seeing at the moment is obviously around flexible working and really how that's been designed to better support caregivers. But we know that that even comes with its challenges. So, you know, organisations that just go out there with a, hey, you know, work wherever and whenever you want message, and then almost just kind of sitting back and again, not having those proper processes, policies in place, it's really not going to, you know, have the desired impact. Ultimately, you don't want to be putting benefits out there that then in and of itself isn't going to be creating those equitable experiences and kind of penalising people for then taking advantage of them. One thing that I did want to talk about though, and it's great to hear that it already has been discussed in the previous panel and on this one, is around ERGs. We're really seeing those as actually a huge benefit at the moment. So it's something that we're seeing a lot more organisations really lean into. So ERGs are very much those, you know, voluntary, identity-based communities formed really by employees from the ground up within organisations. They're most often formed around, you know, very specific identities, so whether that's gender, race, sexual orientation, but more frequently we are actually seeing them start to kind of pop up for more role-based identities, so whether that is caregiver or, you know, remote work. I myself am part of an ERG at Culture Amp, which is our kind of caregiving one, which as a working mum, kind of coming back after maternity leave is fantastic. It's like that really great source of support. But what we know is, again, from our own research at Culture Amp, is a lot of organisations that do have ERGs now, so those organisations that report having more than one, they are actually making that really meaningful impact on the employee experience. So when we look to some of the data of those organisations that do have ERGs, employees report having, you know, a greater sense of voice within the organisation. They're actually more positive around things such as equality and inclusion, and that they actually report having stronger manager relationships as well. And when you kind of take all of those things in combination, they really create that sense of feeling like you belong and feeling like you're valued within an organisation. And really the effects of ERG really kind of filter right down through the organisation and really can help strengthen the culture. Again, when we think about some of the benefits from that employee perspective, they really give employees that opportunity to, you know, meet and connect with others. We know that they can actually really help employees to learn and grow, which obviously we've talked a lot about the importance of that today, and that's both, you know, personally and professionally. And it can really help employees feel like they're that active voice for change within the organisation. Of course, there are business benefits as well, though. So from that business perspective, ERGs are a great way to actually attract that more diverse talent into the organisation. Again, they can really help develop that talent from within, as well as fostering that sense of, you know, belonging and community within an organisation. So we're really seeing kind of ERGs or those kind of network groups as being a real kind of key benefit that organisations can lean into at the moment.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I think I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, Charlotte, and probably the whole panel. Is in regards to ERGs, obviously they're not paid positions by and large. And I wonder if they should be. If there's, you know, rather than a sort of little stipend, which is what a lot of companies offer, but actually if you want the chair to be able to do that job properly, and I think the relationship between the ERG and senior leadership also changes if there is some sort of remuneration package. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. So this actually came up in the kind of census-wide report as well that I mentioned earlier, and how we know it's actually typical that a lot of the burden of ERGs and kind of creating those comes from those minority groups that we know are already facing more challenges internally. And so there is this kind of interesting dynamic organisations need to get right, where yes, you want employees to kind of build them organically, but you also don't want to be putting the burden on those more marginalised employees. On the point around kind of compensation, that is actually something at Culture Amp we have recently introduced. So all of our ERG leaders are fully compensated.
No way.
They have access
Fantastic.
to kind of attending sort of leadership meetings, so they really get to kind of flex that muscle in terms of presenting, speaking to kind of senior stakeholders within the business. So it's actually a really great opportunity within Culture Amp to become an ERG leader, and you are kind of properly compensated for that time. Brilliant. Which is definitely something we kind of advocate, because as I said, we know that often the burden of DEI work falls on those minority groups, so ensuring that they're properly supported and advocated for within the company is a really kind of key step as part of that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'd love to echo that.
Please.
I think it's a really valid point actually, because oftentimes it's very much not a rewarded
No.
part of someone's extra work. And whether it's
And it doesn't
through-
necessarily get you a promotion either.
No, that's what
yeah.
and I think that's what, I talked earlier about that kind of talent matrices and thinking about performance in a more holistic way and allowing people to play to strengths. I mean, there are amazing skills that you can develop by leading an ERG or being on a committee that I think are undervalued when it comes to that more holistic sort of appraisal of performance. So I would really like it to be seen to be sort of built into appraisal mechanisms. We actually do have a sort of a discretionary bonus pot that we do reward to people that have put loads of hours towards DEI, which I think is fantastic. And we also have an hours allowance as well that's ring-fenced for the work that's done. But they're small steps, I think, and it doesn't necessarily encourage people to step up and take on that responsibility. And it's a lot of time commitment as well.
A lot of time on top of their day job.
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant. Did you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the NHS, we do make sure that people kind of get time back in lieu and stuff like that. And it's just also around creating that next generation of ambassadors. Yes, it might be time-consuming to set them up, but then they normally become self-sufficient the more members that they have, and then you can divvy up the duties and things like that. But no, it's a really, really important part of what we do. And just, you can imagine in the NHS, we've got so many different kind of groups with protected characteristics that we want to support,
Brilliant. Balvinda, did you want to add anything?
It's really important. All the policies and the structures and the groups you set up are really, really important. But I think you have to get to a stage where you can move that into being mainstream, that it's just part of your DNA, just part of the culture, it's who you are. And you take all these policies down to that individual responsibility for a leader to just say, well, actually, that's just, someone mentioned to me the other day, it's just like digital skills. Everyone talks about digital skills. I don't think about digital skills when I'm on my laptop, and that's where we need to move equity to.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we have questions coming in. Please keep the questions coming if you have any specific questions for our panel or just general points that you want to make. Slido is where you need to go. So for those of you that are in the room, it's very clear. Scan it on your brochure. And then for those of you that are watching us online, it's on your screen. We have a question that's come in from Sarah, and she says that that she has shared information that reverse mentoring schemes where our black employers were the mentors has really helped and made a difference. Is this something that you all have seen work in your organisation?
We've had some really good examples in the NHS, and where senior leadership are reverse mentored by entry-level staff, and understanding the challenges to their progression, and really hearing that. I think it's really great for leaders to get back on the floor and actually experience the real life.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Balvinda, this one's specifically for you. Could you talk about the importance of reducing the barrier of prior educational qualifications when it comes to learning programs?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, but it kind of plays back to the history of the OU and us being open 50 years and more or so ago when we set up the Open University. It was about addressing two sectors of society, those who, and let's be honest, didn't have a great experience of academia. School failed them. Whatever the reason, might have been the teacher, might have been the culture, might have been their family environment. That doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have talent or the will to progress in their career. And then the other sector was those who financially couldn't go to university and really get professional qualifications. So those barriers that the role Open University plays, that the mission for social justice, for societal impact, VC Tim Blackman talks about a social movement. I think that all plays its role in saying, let's take you on a journey. Let's take you from dipping your toe into some of our open learn content to progressing onto a certificate, moving on to a qualification, getting a career, building a profession, and all whilst you're staying in your local community.
Brilliant. Did you want to add?
If I can just jump in here, I mean, as you know, it's a huge issue in the NHS. If people have not got the maths and English requirements, and entry onto apprenticeships is a real challenge. And I do think it needs to be addressed by government, because if someone's not been able to achieve during all that schooling, it's not going to happen in the workplace. No. So I just think that, recognising occupational competence and experience. So in the NHS, a lot of our learners have on-the-job experiential learning that they can bring rather than a GCSE or an A-level. Being able to put a metric value to that should help address some of the barriers.
Yeah, so and that's in every area. Yeah, because it's actually what is it that we're valuing? And if we're going to be truly equitable, then we need to figure that out, don't we? So, yeah. I'm going to come to you on this one, Charlotte. And this question is, how does leadership integrity and culture in the organisation impact the success of L&D programmes?
Well, yeah, I think, you know, as I've talked about already, I think you absolutely need the processes and the structure there, but you really need, you know, your leaders and those at the top to be role modelling a lot of these, you know, behaviours and really ensuring that you have that buy-in. Again, kind of going back to the census-wide report, what was really interesting is that actually one of the biggest barriers that HR told us they were facing was actually still getting that buy-in from leadership. So, you know, in terms of those at the top really seeing and understanding the value. So again, it just really highlights, I think, that there is still quite a long way to go, and that HR, it often does fall on, you know, the shoulders of HR to, you know, kind of get that buy-in, particularly when it comes to leaders. But I think they do play that really important role in, you know, cultivating what that looks like. And as I said, kind of role modelling as well. Again, the report found that when it comes to even still diversity at leadership, as you know, you talked about in the previous panel, there is still that real lack of diversity there in many places, and if employees within the organisation aren't looking up and seeing those people that represent them, it then becomes really hard to talk about how you're a diverse and equitable organisation. So I think you really need to be building that from the top.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask you this one actually, Wendy, and it is, how can companies motivate members of majority groups to share the load of organisational citizenship, i.e. ERG support, mentorship, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've talked a lot about what gets measured gets done today.
Yeah.
And whether there's some incentivising that needs to happen. I know that, you know, that's often a good approach, the old carrot and stick approach. I think it goes back to the point I made though about engaging hearts and minds at the beginning. I think if you can connect people to those human stories, I think you can get buy-in because people don't necessarily know what the issues are. And I think when they see it impacting a person that they work alongside, if I go back to the summer of 2020 and George Floyd, one of the most impactful sessions that we ran was just really an open forum for people to share their lived experiences. And actually, the feedback we got from that was tremendous because people hadn't appreciated the depth of feeling that there was, the experiences of people, how hard it was day to day. And some of those instances of colleagues' children being stopped by police, going about their day-to-day business. And all of these things led, I think, a huge sort of groundswell in momentum, which has actually stuck. Yes, there's, you know, some that have fallen by the wayside, but I think that intent and realisation that they can make a difference and they can get involved has started to take a bit more shape just by connecting people in that real kind of heart space.
Yeah, fantastic. Can I check the time again? Can we have that back on the screen? Brilliant. So this is a fabulous question, which I think I'll ask to all of you. So thank you to whoever sent us this question. What does the panel think are the opportunities and challenges in relation to equity of AI potentially being used to build L&D content in the future? That's a good one. I'll start with you, Wendy, and then we'll go along.
Yes. Yeah, AI is a really interesting one. And I must profess I'm not completely up with all. I only learned about ChatGPT about 6 months ago.
Same here.
I know. I was like, what is this thing that everyone keeps talking about? But I think AI has opportunities and disadvantages as well. I think the opportunities are that it can simplify processes and it can streamline and make us more efficient and actually connect us to resources that we may not have known that were available. But I think the downsides is what's feeding that AI. And I still believe, and I'm, as I say, I'm not an IT expert, so I may have this wrong, but AI is only as good as what's feeding it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's about what you trust in that sort of platform that sits behind AI. Now, I know Culture Amp very well, and I absolutely trust, you know, what some of the stuff that Culture Amp will be telling me, the algorithms and things like that, because I understand the work that goes on in the background that's driven those kind of conclusions. So I think it's about having a sort of an awareness, really, of where the AI has come from, what's its purpose, what's it fed by, is something I'd be sort of looking at.
Totally. Where the original information.
Yes, yeah.
Who that came from.
Yeah.
Lucy?
I think AI is, the opportunities are really exciting, if not a bit scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a recent incident where we were judging some apprenticeship awards And once the judges got together, we soon realised that the apprentices had been using ChatGPT because we were having identical paragraphs. And I thought it was me having a menopause moment. I was like, I'm sure I've just read this.
Yeah.
And then when we looked at them, they had actually been using that, which is unfair and also highlights, I think, the issues of digital poverty, because in terms of equity, if you haven't got access to Wi-Fi or devices at home, and therefore ChatGPT, you're going to be disadvantaged further.
Wow, how fascinating. Because it's all of this stuff that you have to consider going forward. People aren't going to be answering themselves. They'll just ask the question to ChatGPT and it will do it for you.
It was really, I didn't know, but we actually put the wording into ChatGPT and said, did you write this? And it said yes.
Oh my God.
See, that's scary, isn't
I feel sorry for those kids. I hope you went back and told them. Write it yourself.
That question, sorry to jump in there, that question has actually come up from a recruitment perspective as well, actually, and we're starting to see more and more that the applications are starting to look quite similar as well. And it's raised a really interesting question of how do we now assess application forms if they've been generated by ChatGPT?
Machine, yeah.
And so then it then falls back to the education piece of like, well, we then need to be better assessors, or we need to adapt because everyone's going to use it. We can't say, right, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT, but it's how we then are able to perhaps bring in other assessment tools and techniques to kind of stress test in a different way.
And it's at what point you say it's okay to use it.
Yes.
Because I suppose for now it's probably not okay to use it, but there'll come a point where that has to change. And
there is also skill in how you use it as well.
Yeah.
You know, you can sort of just pick up what it's put and stick it in your writing, but I think, again, it becomes quite obvious if that's what you've done. I mean, that's old school plagiarism, isn't it, in a way? But I think if you can sort of intelligently take that as a starting point and then put your own words around it, then actually it's a useful skill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think certainly agree with both Lucy.
Well,
and
this is
Wendy.
your area, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
ish, yeah.
Ish, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the opportunities are exciting, but I think more so when we think about the challenges, particularly when it comes to things like L&D. You know, we've talked a lot already today about neurodivergent employees, for example, and I guess my kind of fear or concern around this would be if we're relying so heavily on AI to create things such as L&D, how might that be inadvertently be impacting, say, our neurodivergent, our, you know, dyslexic kind of employee population, for example. So again, we'd be really intrigued as to see how that kind of plays out, and again, what almost, you know, to your point, stress tests or, again, equity audits that organisations are really going to put around that to make sure that they aren't inadvertently, you know, minimising the opportunities that people have or almost holding back those learning and development opportunities for specific employee groups. So yeah, I think opportunities are there, but certainly some kind of challenges, and it'll be interesting to see how that does play out.
Yeah, amazing. And then, Bhavinder?
What can you say at the end of the panel when everything's been said already? But it's scary, isn't it? It's scary just to keep up with it. And even within my field, just keeping ahead of it and reading all the papers. But the opportunities it presents, I mean, just within the Know You context, so we talked about all our students with disabilities. So improving accessibility, not just from the application form, but how you interact with a website, how you interact with learning. It's just a huge amount of work going on right now to see if we can leverage all that. But on a personal level, yeah, it's one of them ones. It's here to stay. You just sit back and engage and watch and see what goes on.
See what happens. Well, we have just 6 minutes to go. Oh no, time flies when you're having fun. So Lucy, there's a question that's come in specifically for you. So if you could answer it very quickly, then I can get takeaways from everyone. So the question is, no, where has it gone? Yeah, question for Lucy. Does the NHS Trust have a standard of EDI policy when it comes to recruitment and L&D, etc.?
Yeah, so I think one of the big misconceptions is that we are one NHS, but I work with all the individual NHS trusts and then 7,000 GP practices, pharmacies, so SMEs. But yes, there is kind of, you know, a strategic oversight in terms of framework, but also recognising some challenges, you know. As a Londoner, rural, coastal, I never realised kind of the challenges that some of them have in terms of the bus stops running at 3 p.m. And, you know, it was a real eye-opener. But, yeah, there definitely is it's a big focus, and there's lots of policies that we try to implement.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so 5 minutes, everybody. Key takeaway that you want to leave. I'm going to start with you, Bhavinder, because we've been coming to you at the end. Start with you. Anything you want to leave our audience with?
think the key message for me is to embrace. I think really early on you started off with some key words, and the panels have picked up on it. But for me, it's embrace the talent that's there. And what does embrace really mean? Because if you can think of your mother's embrace, and I'm going to bring it down to there, it's warm, it's supporting, it's comfort, and then it's nurturing and pushing you forward to achieve the best that you can.
Yeah.
And so that's what Elevate Equity means to me.
Okay, brilliant. Charlotte?
Yeah, I think just for me, just to kind of summarise and almost going back to what I said right at the start is, as I said, I think there really has been that focus of organisations just bringing in that diverse talent, and then suddenly it's there, and their, you know, employees are floundering because they don't then have those right support processes and systems in place to really help them thrive. So I think for me, the focus really going forward needs to be on how organisations can better develop that diverse talent once it's within the organisation. And, you know, I've talked a lot around the need for clear communication and processes, but I think the more structure that we can really provide employees to, as I said, really kind of level that playing ground and make sure that people from underrepresented groups are given those same advancement opportunities, is really where the focus should be.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's recognising kind of the distance travelled and recognising not everybody's starting from the same starting point, and I think that's been a huge issue. So, yeah, just kind of recognising that and celebrating the impact that increasing diversity and widening participation will have on your workforce, and actually looking at the positives that it brings.
Indeed. Brilliant.
I've got two.
Okay.
Been greedy.
Please
The
do.
first one is, I'd like to reiterate the point about thinking slow. This work is not easy, so slowing yourself down, trying new things, having that growth mindset, I think is really important. And then the second one is how you're drawing on diversity of voices as well in terms of how you shape your learning content. One of the things I didn't get to mention was around those kind of more specialist programs, minority learning programs, and who you're using for things like that. And I had a sort of a bit of a moment when I looked at who's in my network, who am I using as training providers? Do they all look the same? Are they all saying the same thing? So bringing that sort of diversity into how you're approaching designing your content, I think is really important too.
Yeah, totally. And was there another one?
There were just a two.
Just a two. Yeah. The other thing I think which has come up actually, not just in this session, but in previous sessions, a question that keeps coming up a lot is how to find the diverse talent, even before attracting them, where you go, if you've always had a standard way of sourcing talent. So to your point of finding new ways to train existing talent, but actually finding the talent in the first place. Can any of you speak to that? Have there been outside of the box ways in which you've attracted talent?
Yeah, definitely in the NHS. I think it's around, you know, not just advertising in NHS Jobs or The Guardian. How many young people for underserved communities are going to look there?
Yeah.
You know, so we do have active outreach where we will be going into schools or mosques or temples and actually telling them about the opportunities.
Fantastic.
I think it's just thinking differently rather than doing what you've always done.
Yeah. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, outreach is absolutely key, and partnering with those organisations that have access to those diverse people as well. I mean, I've done a huge amount of work with the Social Mobility Business Partnership with the Sutton Trust in order to help advance our social mobility aims, and that's been so helpful because, you know, we've all got a day job. We can't go to every school in our local area. So engaging with those experts, I think, is key.
Brilliant. Anyone else want to add? No?
I think for me, first of all, within your organisation, take a long, hard look, take a beat, take a breath. Let's have a look at the talent that's within your organisation already and see if you can encourage them, because they might need a different type of support, confidence. And we talked about journeys, but just seeing a diverse panel, just seeing a diverse leadership group, seeing people like me on a leadership group makes me think maybe that's where I need to go. And then outside of your workplace, it's local outreach. It's you know, social media is fantastic and big ad campaigns are fantastic, great. But it's that individual touch. So get out there, get out into those communities and do something. Right. I was with a call centre in Wales, of all places, and they were talking about the difficulty they had in attracting talent, quite a young environmental group. And what they did was they had their work social nights in clubs, and at the same time, it was, wow, look at us, what a fantastic organisation. And that just attracted in a different talent, because people were looking over there and going, that looks fun.
Fantastic. Imagine being paid to go clubbing. It's not bad, is it? We're all for a bit of diversity if that's what it does. Anyway, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time. A huge thanks to our panel, and thank you all for joining us in the studio, and of course, all of you for watching at home. We will be back for the next session, the final session at 2 p.m, so giving you a little time to go and grab a spot of lunch. And we will see you at 2. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.